When is the right time to sell a stock? How do you protect against inflation? Financial decisions can be tricky, and often your own cognitive and emotional biases can lead you astray. Financial Decoder, an original podcast from Charles Schwab, can help. Join host Mark Reby as he offers practical solutions to help overcome the cognitive and emotional biases that may affect your investing decisions. Listen at schwab.com/financial decoder.
Did you know that parents rank financial literacy as the #1 most difficult life skill to teach? Meet Greenlight, the debit card and money app for families. With Greenlight, you can send money to kids quickly, set up chores, automate allowance, and keep an eye on your kids' spending with real-time notifications. Kids learn to earn, save, and spend wisely, and parents can rest easy knowing their kids are learning about money with guardrails in place. Try Greenlight risk-free today at greenlight.com/Wondery.
Life can change in an instant. My brother-in-law died suddenly, leaving behind my sister and her 2 young kids. He didn't have life insurance, so now they're facing the unthinkable, leaving their home. After seeing what they went through, I immediately called SelectQuote to get life insurance for my family. In 15 minutes, a licensed insurance agent compared policies from highly rated carriers to find me the right coverage in my budget. I got a $500,000 policy for only $16 a month. Plus, I qualified for same-day life insurance. No medical exam was required, and I was covered by the time I hung up. Even if you have a health concern, SelectQuote agents can find you the right policy at the lowest price. And while you can't prepare emotionally for a loss, SelectQuote can give you peace of mind with life insurance. Don't wait until it's too late.
Go to SelectQuote.com to get your free quote today. That's SelectQuote.com. SelectQuote.com. Details on example rate at SelectQuote.com.
This is the Silver Linings Handbook podcast. I'm Jason Blair. And in this bonus episode from the True Crime Meetup we had in Minneapolis in early December, we have a discussion with Jim Schmidt, the father of Gabby Petito, a 22-year-old woman who went missing in 2001, and later it was discovered she had been killed by her fiancé. In this discussion with listeners at the meetup, we talk about paying attention to cases related to people who did not look like Gabby, and whose cases often don't get the attention they deserve. We also have a robust conversation about domestic violence prevention, awareness, and warning signs, and most importantly, how to help those you know who are or may be suffering from domestic violence. One of the challenges with domestic violence is that people do not know how to get out of abusive situations, and those on the outside looking in often don't know the words to say or the things to do to help. You'll also hear me ask Jim a question in the question and answer section about a friend of mine who had written me hours before to let me know that her boyfriend had assaulted her. Jim gave me advice and then followed up with resources that I passed along to my friend, who later told me that she had been watching a television program the day before where they'd given the same advice, and what Jim said and what she heard inspired her to take action. What we learned from Jim is to lean into love and understanding. He and his wife, Nicole, certainly do that. That's this thing about Jim and Nicole. They'll bend over backwards to help anyone through their foundation, the Gabby Petito Foundation, and their partnerships. You can listen to more in the episode I did with Jim and Nicole earlier this year called The Death of Gabby Petito and the Birth of a Movement. In the previous bonus we released from Minnesota, we talked to Julia Cowley, a former FBI profiler and the host of the Consult podcast. You can hear more about domestic violence warning signs in that discussion. With that, here's the conversation with Jim.
I'm still here. Sorry.
Oh, no worries. No worries. Sorry for keeping you waiting for a minute. It was my big mouth that had us going on. You know, Jim was supposed to come on for an hour interview with me, and I think it went on for like, I don't know. It was like, I don't know, easily two or so. But I just wanted to introduce Jim Schmidt. Jim, we've been talking a lot about domestic violence today, and
Yes.
also the cases of Indigenous people. I met Jim's family at CrimeCon in Nashville. Yes, Nashville this year. And they are the parents of Gabby Petito, who went missing and was murdered. It was a huge case. And the family, in many ways, has dedicated themselves to awareness and education around domestic violence, but also looking at the cases that don't get the same amount of attention as Gabby's case. And, I had met one of your family members at the bar, even though I'm not a drinker. We were having an event down there. And I had met one of your family members at the bar and then had gone to the talk about where they were talking about Black people who are missing, and I heard about the work you guys have been doing there. And then I met two amazing women that I've had on the podcast, Vanjie Randall Shorty, who lost her son Zach. And one of the coolest things that came out of it, they were invited by you, a woman named Darlene Gomez, whose friend Melissa Montoya disappeared. But one of the coolest things that came out of it after the Petito Foundation invited them to CrimeCon is, in both cases, for the first time in 24-ish years, they announced progress on Melissa's case. And for the first time since right after Zach's case, they announced progress on the case. So, if you think your advocacy and your arguments and you're pushing up names and reaching out to people doesn't have impact, it does. And so Jim and his wife Nicole came on earlier this year where we talked about domestic violence and some of these cases. And I just wanted to give you guys all an opportunity to hear from Jim about the work we're doing. I'm sure we're going to have people in the audience who are going to ask you about domestic violence and awareness. But Jim, if you could just introduce yourself a little bit and tell us maybe a little bit about your family, and if you're comfortable talking about the impact and the feelings after Gabby was disappeared and you guys ultimately found out she was murdered.
Yeah, absolutely. Can you guys hear me okay?
Loud and clear.
All right, outstanding. All right, so thank you. The introduction, my name is Jim Schmidt. I'm Gabby Petito's stepfather. Some people refer to it as bonus dad. I came into Gabby's life when she was 2 years old, just turning 3. I married my wife. It's going to be almost 20 years now. We've been together for, 23. So I've been a part of Gabby's life for a really long time. On top of that, Nicole and I have 3 other children. Our son TJ, he's 21. Our daughter Maddie, she just turned 16 yesterday, actually. I can't believe that either. And we have our youngest one, Catherine, she's 12. And so, like any other family, we were just living our normal lives at the time, like up in New York. Gabby was out of the house. I know a lot of people know that story already. I was working for a fire department up there. I was a career firefighter. I was a captain in a fire department up there. My wife was a teacher's assistant, just going about our normal lives when everything unfolded with Gabby. And so now our lives today are completely changed as we've been thrusted into this new world. And so a lot of the things that we picked up with Gabby that we saw after the fact, once things started to calm down, there were tremendous amount of discrepancies in the reporting of missing persons, for one. So we started a foundation in Gabby's name, the Gabby Petito Foundation. We started that back in October. My wife, Nicole, she was like, I don't know what we're going to do, but we have to do something. Like we can't just let her death be in vain. And, we were blessed to have a huge platform. The same sites that we utilized to try to find Gabby, Facebook pages and all sorts of other social media networks. We still had this huge platform of people that seemed to be following us. And we were getting messages from people saying that they saw Gabby's story. They didn't realize it at the time, but they recognize it now. They're in a domestic violence situation. They got out. They're safe. And then we started seeing more and more missing persons cases coming up. So we transformed those social media pages into a missing persons page, and we started getting into domestic violence advocacy and seeing those discrepancies. And there's been a few things that have been brought to our attention. And one was, the missing white woman syndrome, how white women like Gabby, blonde hair, blue eyes, typically get more attention than other people of color, men. The Indigenous culture is another one that gets like next to no attention on it. And it's really a huge injustice to these people and to their families. And so there's been a few times where there's been some cases where they've mentioned how Gabby got so much attention and they have not. And so we've reached out to those families and actually helped elevate their voices, like you mentioned before with Melissa Montoya, with Darlene Gomez is a great friend of ours. I actually have a Navajo flag behind me because there was another family that Darlene was representing, and that was the family of Jamie Yazzie, a young Navajo woman who had gone missing prior to Gabby. There was really nothing going on with her case. That was out in Arizona, New Mexico area. And so there was, a suspect that had a mind, but there was really no leads. There's, a lot of missteps along the way, and the family wasn't getting really any answers. And they said, Jamie was basically the Gabby of the Navajo Nation, and yet she's getting no news coverage. And so Gabby's father had reached out to Darlene, and that's when we started talking. And then all of a sudden, and this was right after Gabby, boom, they start really looking into Jamie Yazzie's case. And November of 2021, Jamie had been missing already since 2020. They found her body. And so now they really started investigating it. And they figured out who it was. They brought the suspect in. Turns out that in that time, from the time that Jamie went missing until the time they found her body and were able to make an arrest on it, that person who had murdered Jamie had gone on to terrorize 3 other women, viciously attacking them, kidnapping, you name it. And so those were the original charges he was brought on. So we were asked to come out for his sentencing, which they were playing games with. They delayed and delayed and delayed once he was found guilty of the crimes. And we went out to the sentencing, and we took part of the prayer ceremonies beforehand for Jamie's family and even for Trey James, the person responsible for her murder. And I was presented with this flag afterwards and asked to make sure that I represent their nation anytime we're talking about topics like this.
Oh, that's awesome. And thank you for that, Jim. One of the things about domestic violence that I was just thinking about as you were talking, and you gave that example of how Trey James terrorized 3 other women, we don't often think about, like, when we're looking for somebody who may have committed a crime, that idea that, in domestic violence situations, for example, and many others, these aren't one-offs. These aren't situations where someone does something once, they repeat the behavior. And the slower law enforcement or the slower communities, when people are not saying what's happening, the slower they are, the more sort of carnage that exists. And are there things related to awareness or advocacy or investigations that you're hoping people can do? I'm just thinking about how can people be empowered to sort of stop that carnage?
So domestic violence affects everybody. It's not like it affects people that are of a lower income or a specific demographic or age. It affects everybody, all ages, all walks of life. It's in every community. It's one of those things that it's not often discussed. It's like mental health, like it's over there. We're not talking about it. And it's something that we really do need to talk about. And so we really need to start those conversations with our youth, because with the age of the internet and having everything at your fingertips now, children are exposed to things earlier on in age. And even a lot of parents don't even know what some of the signs are to look for. And I think it starts with teaching each other respectful relationships and what that looks like, and having boundaries with each other, and what's right, what's wrong, and how to treat each other, and starting those conversations early on with each other excuse me, and recognizing that not all domestic violence situations start as physical violence. There's a lot of things that are happening beforehand, and it all comes back to coercive control, power and control. That's ultimately what domestic violence is about. It's about one person maintaining control over another, and they use a lot of different means to do this. And you hear a lot with people with narcissistic behavior, gaslighting, and things like that. But they slowly start chipping away at someone else's whole sense of being until they have them under their full control. And some of those things that you're looking for might be isolation. So if you notice that your loved one, a child of yours, is dating somebody new, and suddenly, they're spending less time around you, or they're spending less time around their friends or people that may be able to recognize that they're not acting properly, that's one way they use it. Some financial abuse or financial control or other ways to do it. And just starting love bombing, that's another one. Love bombing is a big thing that they do to kind of bring you in. And then once they have that control over you, you're kind of locked in there. And it then
It's that,
graduates
and the
on.
idea of love bombing is like a ton of love. But then I think sometimes we don't talk about the next part, which is like you withhold that love to control, right? You throw it at them and then withhold it.
Yeah, and then you just mess with their whole sense of reality. When you're having conversations, you make them believe that what they're saying is not true or didn't happen. When something does happen and you get into a fight or whatever, you're completely loving and apologetic and going back and then changing their sense of what happened and just manipulating them. And it happens. It happens. It happened with Gabby. We didn't know those at the time. We didn't know those signs, and we saw it after the fact, looking at it.
Julia Cowley, who was on right before you, she's a retired FBI profiler and host of the Console podcast. She gave a great example. If you see that early on in a relationship, and she gave the example of somebody asks you out on a date, the person who's asked out says that they're not interested. If someone tries to make you feel bad for the way you feel, like with something like, oh, am I not too good enough for you? Because I think in my mind, you ask somebody out for a date, they say no. The right answer is, well, if you ever change your mind, right? But if they make you feel bad for your feelings early on, that's a sign to run.
Yeah, absolutely.
What do you
flags?
Yeah, right. Real red flags. I was curious from your perspective. You mentioned the idea of like isolation and not necessarily knowing what was going on in Gabby's relationship. Are there things that you would recommend that friends and family can do to demonstrate that they're available for someone or help them in those situations?
Absolutely. And the last thing they need from anybody is an ultimatum to say, like, listen, like, hey, you're in this bad relationship. If you don't get out of it, or, if you don't just leave now, then, don't bother calling me anymore. People that are in these relationships face ultimatums every day, and they often know sometimes the best way to navigate that situation themselves. And you can't force anybody to leave that. I'll tell you that we know people that are deeply involved in the domestic violence world and, been advocating for years, and they have family members that are in really bad domestic violence situations and they can't get them out of it. You can't force somebody to leave. The best thing that you can do is continue to be a support network for them.
Calling all dog owners. Your furry friend deserves top-notch nourishment, and Ollie delivers the clean, fresh nutrition your dog needs in 5 flavors they'll absolutely flip over. Ollie is made in U.S. kitchens with ingredients carefully sourced from trusted growers and producers around the world, with absolutely no harmful fillers or preservatives. With protein-first recipes like fresh beef with sweet potatoes, fresh turkey with blueberries, or fresh lamb with cranberries, you might start thinking, dang, my dog eats better than I do. And that's probably true when it comes to Ollie. Give your pup a fresh start this new year by letting them taste test a personalized meal plan with Ollie. Head to ollie.com/Wondery. Tell them all about your dog and use code WONDERY to get 60% off your first box of meals when you subscribe today. Plus, they offer a clean bowl guarantee on the first box. So if you're not completely satisfied, you'll get your money back. That's OLLIE.com/Wondery and enter code WONDERY to get 60% off your first box. Start your dog's new year off right with Ollie. Start your dog's new year off right with Ollie.
Ready to prioritize yourself in the new year? Your skin is a great place to start. Dime Beauty, founded by a master esthetician, is more than just a skincare company. With 4 skin-conscious categories, skincare, beauty, body care, and fragrance, Dime offers simple, spa-worthy products that will help you enter 2025 with confidence. Whether you're revitalizing your regimen with nourishing products or building one from scratch, Dime makes it easy. The Work System, our all-in-one best-selling routine, includes a cleanser of your choice, toners, serums, and moisturizers, taking the guesswork out of skincare for your healthiest, happiest skin yet. Dime's commitment to clean ingredients and sustainable packaging ensures every product is as gentle on your skin as it is on the planet. With thousands of glowing 5-star reviews and a loyal community, the results speak for themselves. Revive your skin and give yourself the routine refresh you deserve by visiting dimebeautyco.com. That's dimebeautyco.com. Your best skin awaits.
To tell them that you're there to listen and you're hearing what they're actually saying. You're being empathetic and just letting them know that, hey, I'm here for you when you're ready, and not giving them that ultimatum. Just I'm here to listen. I'm here I'm a shoulder to cry on. What can we do? What do you need? What do you need for me to help you? And just be a support when that person's ready. And typically it's 7 times. It takes 7 times for that person to leave and come back to that relationship before they're really ready to go, for so many reasons. But just always being there for them is key.
Yeah, I thought that was a really good point. Just thinking about what you're saying right now. They're getting ultimatums all the time. And, if you're faced with choosing between an ultimatum from somebody who loves you, but saying, they're going to throw up some boundary, and someone you fear or who is love bombing you or manipulating it, you can see how somebody would make the choice to sort of isolate from the person who loves you. I know you had mentioned the cases of Melissa Montoya and the case in the Navajo Nation that Darlene brought to you. Is there something that we as society, because in true crime and in true crime podcasting, to some extent on TV, although Dateline might do a better job sometimes, we aren't often pursuing cases. And I've got good insight from my own podcast. I've probably done, 7 or 8 cases on missing or murdered Indigenous people this year. And I can tell you, I could graph on a chart what happens to the downloads. They go down 25 to 20% per episode. And I'm sure I know it's happening with larger podcasters. And we've kind of decided, who cares what happens to the downloads? These are important cases. But are there things collectively in the true crime community or the creator community we can do to bring attention to the cases where it's not a blonde, blue-eyed, middle-class girl? Because it could even be a blonde, blue-eyed girl, but we know from places like the Long Island serial killer case, because they were sex workers. Are there things that we can do to humanize, or whatever you would recommend?
Yeah, it's we see it a lot. I'll tell you, and this one has really, really baffled me. So I work with quite a few people that they follow Amber Alerts and missing children alerts a lot, and they go on, whether it's YouTube Live or TikTok Lives, and they're really, really good about trying to get information, find information, and locate these kids. And there was one, I think it was about 2 weeks ago, and when he goes on the lives, like, you can see it, boom, all of a sudden he's got 300 people following his live. And, it's a kid, everybody's jumping on it. They want to try to find information and get information to law enforcement. And this child, it was an autistic child that had gone missing in Ohio. And he was like a 7 or 8 year old black male boy who went missing. And as soon as people came in and saw that it was a person of color, boom, it went down to like 60 people. And he just made a point to say, it happens every time, and this is disgusting. And he was like, and the next day there was the same situation in another state with a white boy with autism, and it maintained all those followers. And it was absolutely disgusting because we're all human beings and we all deserve the attention, and our loved ones deserve to be found. And for him, he's like, I keep pushing them out, and that's what we need to do. We need to look at these cases. These families are hurting just like anybody else. We have to make sure that we're being ethically responsible. We're being victim centered and oriented, thinking about the family, being empathetic when we're reporting these cases, and just knowing that this could be anybody. This could be one of our loved ones out there, and they should be treated the same. Oftentimes when we see people of different ethnicities being reported, Indigenous is a big one. That you can go onto some of the websites for national Indigenous women and stuff like that, and they actually have ethical reporting for Indigenous people for the media, like media tools for them. Because oftentimes they go right away to, oh, it was a sex worker, or it was, from a poverty area, or it was this, or it was that. Let's get the facts of the case out there. This is a human being. Let's get their description out there. Let's figure out what the circumstances are. And if those other portions of it are important because that might help find where they could be, or that maybe somebody dangerous has taken them, or whatever it might be, yeah, then report it. But the focus should be on that person first, no matter what they look like, no matter who they are, and just think about the family. That there's people that love that person attached to it. I think is huge.
Yeah, and I think humanizing people, it's such an important thing. And the one thing I'll say to listeners is, it's just like voting. The podcasters, creators follow the eyeballs and the ears of their listeners. And if your eyeballs and ears go there, it can make a difference. And politicians follow the creators. So it can actually have a real impact on resources getting thrown at cases. So I'll go back to something we talked about before. Brian Thompson, the CEO of United. I was reading in the New York Times last night that there are 600 investigators on the case. So when someone gets murdered in New York, even if it's right off the edge of Central Park tourist area, you're usually going to see like 4, 5, 6 detectives, some analysts from their technical assistance resource bureau on the case, not 600 detectives. And I'm sure if that had been an Indigenous person, a Black homeless person, a sex worker who had been murdered, we would have seen that or less. Is there something that we can do as voters, as listeners, as just forget the labels, as human beings, to encourage law enforcement to have equity when it comes to resources on cases?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's, it starts on your local level, just really starting on that level and asking the questions and following up. If they have, the local police department has a monthly community meeting, gather some data if you know that there's some cases going on in your area, and start asking questions and putting pressure on them. And that's the one thing that we found is when we start to put pressure on them, then it starts to force them to answer questions or start to look into things, and a lot of times it helps. So by continuing to put pressure on our public officials, and even on our bigger media outlets to pursue these things and make noise, it's going to start bringing attention. I mean, I have a whole folder here from my research of things that I looking at here, just on the Indigenous level, what goes on in their communities. And if that went on in any other neighborhood, if that went on in any middle-class neighborhood, they'd be up in arms over these statistics of violent crimes that are going on, how they're going missing and trafficked at, monumental rates. For an Indigenous person, for an Indigenous woman, you have a better chance of being violently assaulted or sexually assaulted than you do have of going to college. And yet nobody's talking about it.
Yeah, it's frightening. It's really frightening.
Yeah.
Keep on going.
I was just going to say, any place else, if I told you that, so the average, domestic violence rate for women in America is like 1 in 4 are going to experience domestic violence in their life, right? That number is like 85% for Indigenous women. Sexual assault rates are at like 65%. If you're an Alaskan Native, those numbers are like 100%. Like they will. When you're talking in their world that, they're one of the top 3 causes of death for an Indigenous person is homicide, not heart attack, not stroke. Why isn't this not a national matter? Why in 2024 are we okay with this? But if it was happening somewhere else, if it was happening in Long Island, if those were the numbers for people living on Long Island, where I was from in New York, they would be up in arms about it. We got to do something. So keep putting pressure on them.
Right. If the number of or percentage of cats that went missing in Westchester County, New York was the same as Indigenous women on some reservations or missing or murdered, it would be on the front page of the newspaper. It would have been. And so I like that idea of putting pressure on the media outlets, putting pressure on politicians. But I wanted to open it up to any folks in the audience who have any questions, or any of my podcasting advocacy colleagues. Any questions for you guys? Anyone want to know about how you can get involved in their work? There you go. We got one.
What is something that we can do to stop abusers from getting off or taking plea deals?
That is a great question, and that is something that really gets to me. So, obviously, Gabby was died by homicide by strangulation, and statistics will show you that strangulation and people who strangle are single-handedly probably some of the deadliest people that walk the face of the earth on so many levels. So not just, if you get strangled even one time by an intimate partner, you're at a 750% higher chance of being killed by that person. They're going to kill you. The majority of our law enforcement, the people that kill them in the line of duty, like 40% of them have a history of strangulation. It's a felony in pretty much all 50 states, but yet 90% of them who are charged with that initially are never convicted of a felony strangulation. And they go back out onto the street and continue to commit crimes and hurt people, and in instances kill them. So we have legislation that states like this is what should happen. They should be put away, but yet we're not following up on it. And there's a lot of great organizations out there. Alliance for Hope International is one. They have the Training Institute on Strangulation Prevention, and they have a family justice center model that they use. And it's basically wraparound services where everybody who would come in contact with somebody who's in a domestic violence situation is all under one roof. They got higher prosecution rates for abusers coming out of there, and they have a higher percentage of victims leaving their services, thriving and becoming survivors after the fact. They bring in DAs, the prosecuting officers, they bring in judges, and they train all of them. And so, in my opinion, we need to continue to train anybody on any level that's going to run into somebody who is potentially a victim of violence. Right from our first responders, our 911 dispatchers, our cops, firefighters, EMTs, all the way up to advocates, nursing, hospital staff, all the way up the line into the judicial field. When they start to see just how deadly the consequences are of these incidents, they need to be held accountable, and they need to hold these people accountable for what they're doing.
I know we don't do a lot of domestic violence. You mentioned it was like mental health. We don't talk about it. We don't do a lot of awareness in schools and things like that. And, your point about strangulation, and I might need a second, really hit me hard because about, 2 weeks ago, I have an Indigenous friend who just kind of like disappeared. We were messaging back and forth, and then she wasn't messaging me. And she's been sick, so I've been keeping an eye on her. And then she messaged me last week, and she said, my boyfriend choked me, right? And, he had gotten upset that she was on her phone so much, and so that's why she kind of disappeared. And then ultimately he choked her. And I'm thinking about her right now because I've just tried to be supportive, but I would love for her to hear that fact, right? I'm not going to tell her, that I'm upset at her or judge her over it. I would love for her to know that choking moment put her more at risk. And so I'm curious, just in your place, in a situation like that situation, where you don't want to be judgmental and you don't want to say something like you got to leave him, or how can we help people who are experiencing it become more aware of the risks? And then how can we help young women and men become more aware of the risks when they're younger?
So all great questions, and I'm very sorry she's going through that. First and foremost, you want to let her know that there's resources out there available. So the National Domestic Violence Hotline, 1-800-799-SAFE. That's SAFE. It's a hotline. They have a chat. It's all private. They have buttons that you can click off immediately. So it goes to like a weather app. So an abuser can't really track what you're looking at, and they can help guide and start safety planning for them. But oftentimes, a person who's being victimized and a person who has been strangled, they will refer to that term as being choked. He just choked me a little bit. So we have to understand that when they're saying being choked, well, what does that look like? How did they place their hands around your neck? Was it two hands? Did they put you into like a chokehold? Did they cover your mouth, your nose? So when we're looking at this from a medical standpoint, the choking is actually a result of a foreign body airway obstruction going into your airway. That's choking. When we put our arm or a device, a ligature or something along those lines around the neck region, and we cut off either oxygen or blood flow to the brain, it is strangulation and it is a felony. Now, I mentioned earlier about if they do it to you even once, the likelihood of them doing it again and murdering you, those rates are exponential. But there are other physiological effects that can happen to a person who's been strangled even just once or repeatedly. And the one organ in our body that is most sensitive to oxygen deprivation is the brain. Our brain needs oxygen. So the carotid arteries run up right around here on our neck, and then they carry the oxygenated blood up into our brain. And then on the outside of that is our jugular veins, and those carry deoxygenated blood away from our brain back to go get more oxygen. It only takes about 4 pounds of pressure on your jugulars and a little bit more than, I think it's somewhere around 8 to 10 pounds of pressure to occlude the carotid artery. Our windpipe in here, the trachea, that's about 33 pounds of pressure on there to occlude that. And when you start withholding oxygen from the brain or not allowing deoxygenated blood to leave our brain, we start building up pressure in our head. That person is subject to stroke, which might not happen immediately. That could happen a couple days down the line. Carotid dissections, which can be deadly. A whole slew of other physiological things. Seizures, traumatic brain injuries from hypoxia. It goes on and on and on. And they might not even realize it right away. So if somebody's been strangled, they really need to go get checked out. They need some diagnostic checks and tests to make sure that they don't have any type of internal damage. And it could happen. It might not even happen 1 day, 2 days. It could be a month. It could be a year later that all of a sudden they drop and stroke out. And it's from that. It is really, really dangerous. And we need to do a better job of getting this information out to people. And I mentioned before, Alliance for Hope International, the Training Institute on Strangulation Prevention. They have a lot of free downloadable resources for people to look at that shows you timelines and how quickly you can go unconscious and ultimately die from being strangled. It doesn't take very long. And so it's very bad. If she's been strangled just once, she is in a very, very dangerous situation. And I think for her, it would just be, you need to keep reassuring her that there's resources out there, that she is in danger. And, just give her that number that I told you, or if you know of a local number by you, have her contact.
Thanks for that. Thanks for that, Jim. Any other questions?
So I had a quick question for you. So there was recently a case in Minnesota with Adam Frabel. I'm not sure if you're aware of it.
Yes.
Obviously, he was just recently convicted by a jury in Mankato, Minnesota. And, obviously, that he quoted that, like, you'll end up like Gabby Petito, things like that. I guess what would be your message to the Kingsburys that, they tried to get her out of this domestic violence relationship, domestic abuse? What would be your message to the family that's still kind of grieving? They just got that verdict like a month ago. what would be your message to them?
Well, first and foremost, my heart goes out to that family. And actually, I did do a little video on that one because we did hear about that. And 2 days ago, I was sent another video from the Jay Lee case out of Mississippi. Just a graduate student. He was a graduate student out of Mississippi. And in that case, the person who's alleged to have murdered Jay Lee apparently had Google searched how long to strangle someone, Gabby Petito. So my heart goes out to those families. We know what the grieving process looks like. I hope that I'm never going to use the word closure, because you never get closure. Even if the person's convicted, there's always that void in your heart and a lot of unanswered questions. And just know that, it's not your fault that this happened. It was solely by the hands of another person who committed a depraved act of evil, and that to make sure that they're getting help, they're speaking to somebody, not to hold that in. Find somebody good. There are resources available through the Crime Victim Compensation Fund. Make sure that you're speaking to somebody and you're doing good self-care, because I'll tell you, 3 years after Gabby is where we're at now. It doesn't get easier. It doesn't get better. It doesn't suddenly, like, you wake up one day and go, I'm okay with this now. That grieving process looks different every day. We have our good days. We have our bad days. And just know that there are resources out there for you to get help from. And if they ever wanted to reach out to, my wife is an amazing resource. If they ever wanted to reach out to us and speak to us, seeing as though we have gone through something very similar, we'd be more than happy to talk to them and try to guide them in any way possible.
Anyone else? Any other questions? Yeah. Okay. Come on over.
Hi, Jim. It's Raul Ketchlisk. I just tagging on to what you were just saying. I'm not a true crime consumer. I'm not a true crime fan. I advocate, I research. And one of the things I've learned is that watching your family find a path forward, a catharsis, to go from the sadness of what you all experienced into actionable advocacy, not only for underrepresented classes of people, but what I've watched Nicole do and so many other families, of being a resource for other families. Watching Nicole and Tara become close with Bethany Hassel, who's searching for her brother Vlad. Through other organizations like Light the Way that I volunteer with, or Season of Justice. I think it's just as fundamentally important that folks like you that have lived real crime, real trauma, and have real experiences support all the other families and help provide a path forward for their own searches, their own answers, and possibly their own advocacy for other families. And I think that is such an important element of what you folks do. And I commend very much that.
Thank you. I greatly appreciate that. And, we're the type of family that we couldn't sit back and not do anything. We felt like we had this platform. We had these people coming forward saying, how Gabby's story has changed their life, it's gotten them to safety. And we totally understand the opposite end of the spectrum too, where if somebody says, you know what, I just want to try to go back to some semblance of a normal life, that's okay too. But we just want to help as many people as we can.
Well, Jim, it's a poignant point that you really never get over the grief of, true grief, right? And my dad said something to me not too long ago, that really grief is love that has nowhere to go. But sometimes there are moments where we find a way for that love to go somewhere. And I appreciate what you all do in terms of love. And then I guess my closing thought for you is I hope that you continue to find some measure of peace in your grief through helping others. And I'm just grateful for you guys.
Thank you. And we're so thankful for having this opportunity to come out and speak, and just to continue to advocate for everybody. It really is. It is something that it helps us get through the day. It really does. Especially this time of year. This is not a good time of year for us at all, but being able to help others certainly helps uplift us and keep us going.
Thank you. Appreciate it, Jim. Say hi to Nicole for me.
I certainly will.
Thank you. Talk to you soon.
Bye, guys. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us for this bonus episode from the Minneapolis True Crime Meetup we had earlier this year. If you'd like to have conversations like this with me and other listeners, you can find us on most social media platforms, including a listener-run Facebook group called the Silver Linings Fireside Chat. For deeper conversations and the opportunity to participate in live conversations, feel free to join us on our Patreon at www.patreon.com/The Silver Linings Handbook. Not only is that a way to support the podcast, we also have exclusive content there and some really cool discussions. I'm Jason Blair, and this is the Silver Linings Handbook podcast. We'll see you all again soon.